On this part 2, we will be identifying practical skills that can help you build strength in the face of your loss. So basically, in other words, what can you do to cope with your loss? In the previous part, we talked about identifying, putting into words what's happening. So now, once you're able to put it into words, what can you do? What are some practical and easy tips that you can do to help you move on towards the healing process? The first thing that you need to do, and we have an exercise for this on page 9 of the booklet, is to set up your priorities. Setting up priorities is hard on a daily basis, even more so in the midst of your grief. So it is hard to focus, to keep your thoughts straight, because this creates stress. But it is important that you start channeling your thoughts and writing down what are some of those priorities that you need to start paying attention to so that you can help yourself move forward. A lot of tasks come up during the grieving process that seem like mountains that are hard to do. Tasks related to yourself, keeping a regular schedule, just even in terms of sleeping and eating, or doing activities that help you relax because there's so many things that need to be done. Family is particularly difficult in the loss of someone that was the caretaker of the family, and all of a sudden you have to step in and start taking care of everybody else. We hear these stories over and over and over. I had to appear strong because there was no one else who could do these things. And tasks related to the loss, things that need to be done, and some of these can be very painful, whether it's setting up funeral arrangements or bills or taking on a business. We had participants who said, my husband died and now I'm in charge of the business and I have to learn it and I don't know how when I cannot even think straight. Cleaning the process, cleaning the belongings of your loved one, that is a very painful process. And sometimes it's important for you to start thinking, how can I get help to get this task done? But the first thing to do is to write down your priorities. Make a note and put them in a place that you see every day so that you don't forget where your attention needs to be. Put them in the mirror where you wake up every morning, in the refrigerator where you have to go, so that they serve you as a constant reminder of what are some of the things that you need to prioritize. Schedule time during your day to take care of yourself. And write it down as to what specifically is it that you need to do, whether it's spending time relaxing, meditating, going for a walk, praying, whatever helps you, and only you can decide what that is. It needs to be prioritized. Spending time with a loved one or doing things for them. When can you schedule that during your week? And tasks related to your loss. Another essential skill during these difficult moments is to set boundaries and limits. And this can be very difficult to do because we don't want to be rude or ungrateful to other people that might be wanting to help us. But unfortunately, often people don't know how to help during the grieving process. They try their best, and sometimes they say things that are not helpful or that is not what you need in the moment, but people don't know. I had a case of a friend who lost her son, and she was saying that people will come and tell her, he's in a better place. It's okay, he's not suffering anymore. And she said to me, that's not helping me, that's hurting me even more. But she didn't feel like she could say that to other people because she didn't want to hurt them, or she didn't want to appear like she was not grateful for their support. So it is important to build this ability to say no. And there are easy ways in which you can do it without being rude or mean or without pushing people away. And probably the people on the other side are going to be so grateful that you're telling them what is it that you need. So one way to do it is always to do it with kindness. So for instance, you can say, thank you very much. I appreciate that you're here trying to help me. I appreciate that you're giving me advice or guidance, but right now I don't need that. This is what I need from you. This is this other thing that I need, whatever that is, whether it's sit next to you in silence, whether it's driving you a place, whether it's doing a task in the list of priorities that you need to do. But it is often well received by people because you're also helping people know how they can help you. But they won't know unless you set your boundaries and limits. So it is okay to say no, as long as you always do it with kindness and in a way that is not going to leave you feeling guilty or feeling bad about saying no. The next, on page 11, we have an exercise about starting to think about surrounding yourself with adequate sources of support. It is important for your healing to get support, yet it needs to be the right kind of support for you. Sometimes we think that the right kind of support is the people closer to us, our family members, but often that is not the case, whether it's for personality or for situation or because you're dealing with the grief process in a very different way and you don't come to understand each other. So you need to start defining what is that kind of support that you need and where you can find it. Sometimes you might need just emotional support, someone that can hug you or that can kiss you or that can just sit with you. Who among the people that surround you can give you that kind of support? Sometimes it's informational support. And what I mean by that is people who can show you how to do things that maybe you don't know how to do because your loved one used to take care of those tasks, that can help you how to navigate funeral arrangements, that can help you find out all those other things that are new to you. And that might be a very different person than the person who's providing you with emotional support. Instrumental support. That means sometimes when you're in the midst of the grieving process, there are tasks that become very hard. Sometimes you cannot even drive yourself or get yourself to your medical appointments because you just don't have enough energy. Who can help you with that? A neighbor, a friend, someone in your church group? Only you can determine who that is. But it's important for you to sit down and start brainstorming that. And there is also another important source of support that you need to start finding, and that is the strength within yourself, your connection to a greater power beyond spiritual or religious denomination. What is your connection with a superior being that you can feel that constant presence that is going to help you move forward in your painful process? So brainstorm. Sometimes support groups are very helpful because when you're in the midst of bereavement, you might want to hear from other people who have been there as well. Sometimes it feels hard to connect with people who are not going through the same thing. But right now we have internet resources, online support groups that you can find to help you in your healing process. Another important skill is to challenge unhelpful thoughts. It's something that in psychology we call reframing, changing that little voice that sometimes gives us so much stress. So it is important that we learn to identify those kinds of thoughts, and they can be many. I'm going to give you some examples. When we ignore the good and we choose to focus only on the bad things that are going to happen. So a common one in the case of bereavement is to think, now I'm all alone, and it will always be like that. I will never feel loved again. That's another one that we hear. Blowing things out of proportion, feeling like you will never be happy again. Fortune telling, this is often the case in people who have experienced sudden deaths, or for instance, deaths due to suicide, which can be very traumatic. And for instance, people start feeling that something bad follows. What else follows? We had a participant one time that was telling us that there was a subsequent series of suicide in her family, and that she could only think of who is going to be the next person for many, many years. And that keep her into this complicated grief process. Negative labeling our feelings. We talk about feelings in the first part of the webinar. When we, for instance, start saying, well, I'm feeling angry today, but then we start judging ourselves. We're not a good person. You're not supposed to be angry. Or it happens the opposite, when we start feeling some joy again, and then we're like, you're not supposed to be feeling happy. You're in the grief process. All those shoulds are also examples of unhelpful thoughts that are not going to help you in the healing process. Blaming yourself. And we'll talk a little bit more about the guilt process during the time of bereavement and how harmful it can be to help you achieve a connection with your loved one. So it is important to overcome these thoughts, that you look for evidence that can counteract such thoughts and find more evidence that can find you new ways of thinking. And this is important to do because it can help you in your process of developing and finding hope. So we have this in the booklet on page 13. So how do you find hope? And you know that it is often in the darkest skies that we can see the brightest stars. It's true. So you need to start by reflecting on the process. Start by finding meaning and purpose in your loss. So what is meaning? It's trying to find the significance of something, in this case, your loss. So finding an understanding as to your why. You need to find a why. Why are you in grief? Why are you hurting? Why did you lose your loved one? Finding meaning is important to healing. And only you can find that answer. We cannot tell you what your why is. Sometimes you don't understand the why in the moment, but it's when you look at the big picture that you start understanding why it happened. We gave you a possible why to so much pain that you're going through, and that is that it is a consequence of having loved. So we grieve because we love. That is a why that we're suggesting, but you need to find what your why is for you in order for you to move towards the healing process. Because once you find that meaning, it can help you find a purpose that will help you to continue to get up every morning and continue to put one foot in front of the other. So finding purpose in your loss is important so that you can move forward. And purpose is about, so now that you experience this, what do you do with your loss? How do you choose to live your life in a way that you can honor that loved one? That you can honor the lessons learned, the stories that you build together with your loved one, so that you can continue to move forward. And now we move on to the third and final piece of this brief webinar. That is about, now that you put into words what you're feeling, now that you have a few ideas as to building skills for helping you cope, how do you adjust to a world without your loved one? How do you learn to live with your loss? This does not mean that you forget your loved one. It means that you adjust, that you reorganize, that you restructure yourself and your life to build again with the lessons learned from that love that you have the gift of experiencing. And the first and most important is to make amends. We know from a quote from Dr. Kubler-Ross that she says, guilt is perhaps the most painful companion of death. One of the most common roadblocks to processing your grief is holding on to unnecessary guilt. It can cause stress, anxiety, sadness, and pain. And there are many reasons for guilt when we lose a loved one. For instance, to give you some examples, is not being there at the time of the death. You know, I wish we all had that crystal ball that I keep talking about, that we know when it's going to happen. Sometimes it happens suddenly and unexpectedly. Sometimes I have a long period of time, but we really never know when that moment is going to happen. And in our minds, it might feel like there's never a right time to lose our loved one. Not saying goodbye properly, feeling like there will always be something that was left unsaid. Not apologizing for someone. We all make mistakes. That's part of being a human person. But it can create so much guilt if we keep ruminating about the things that we didn't do or say. Not doing something that could have prevented suffering. This is a common one that happened, unfortunately, like I mentioned, in the case of suicide, that people felt maybe I could have done more. Or in case of long-term illness, which says maybe I could try another doctor, maybe I could. And then we start going into the shoots that feel that negative voice in our heads that does not allow us to move forward in the healing process. Taking the person for granted, start thinking, I should have spent more quality together, but I took my loved one for granted. And again, it's probably a normal process because we did not know. Or in the case of people who lose a loved ones after a long-term illness, primarily if they have been the caregivers, is feeling a relief about the dead. And this can be a very painful one, that people might say, why am I feeling relief if I should be sad? And then the guilt comes. That is a natural response. Caregiver for a terminal ill can be very demanding and very difficult. And it's hard to watch your loved one go through pain on a daily basis and deteriorate, such as in conditions of Alzheimer's or dementia. But it's important that you start figuring out ways to release your guilt. Releasing your guilt is necessary to stay connected to your loved one in a healthier and more peaceful way. So how do you do that? How can you start letting go of your guilt? The first one is to understand it. The second one, we talked about it in a previous segment, is to reframing. Choose to focus on the good. Make a list of all those good things on that relationship and stop focusing on the shoots or on the things that were unsaid or undone. And most importantly, forgive yourself. Sometimes writing letters, sending them out there, putting it out there, telling your story can be good in the healing process. Next, it's important that you learn to identify and build upon your values, your beliefs, and your qualities. We have exercises on pages 15 and 16. And this is important because the way that we react to our loss is also covered by our prior experiences we have with loss. So what have been those lessons learned based on beliefs, based on the talents and the skills that we have that can help us move forward? What has shaped you in your previous experiences of loss in your life that you can use now? What do you know about yourself? We all have talents and gifts. Sometimes we try to ignore them, but what can you use? We're gifted with 5 senses that if we want, we can close our eyes and reproduce what our loved ones felt like, sounded like, looked like, smell like. Learn to use all of those gifts and talents and beliefs that you have, those things that are important to you, so that you can create that connection. And another important aspect is to learn to tell your story. Dr. Kubler-Ross tells us that you must get it out. Grief must be witnessed to be healed. Grief shared is grief abated. Tell your tale, because it reinforces that your loss matter. In sharing your story, we dissipate the pain little by little, giving a small drop to those we meet to disperse it along the way. It is in telling that story that you start listening to your healing process and learning through your healing processes. You start honoring your loved one, but most importantly, you start helping other people getting prepared for when they have to face their own. healing process. Because as I mentioned in section 1, we will all go through this in life. It's part of living. So in telling your story, you don't know tomorrow if someone might be remembering those words of wisdom that you have had that will help them deal with their own loss. And on page 17, we have a list of things that people have told us that they have used to honor their loved ones so that they can start remembering them in a more positive way. Some examples are praying, relaxation, meditation, where they recreate with all of their senses, the presence of the loved ones, walking, exercising, listening to the favorite song of that person that they lost, or the type of music that they lost, and celebrating them in their honor. Journaling. There is something very, very powerful about putting your thoughts in writing, then letting them sit down, and then a week later, come back and read it. It will be very, very healing for you to learn to observe yourself throughout that process. And journaling can help you with that. Reading a book in honor of your loved one, sometimes even reading aloud, thinking as if you are reading with the presence of your loved one right next to you. Building, cleaning, redecorating a place in your house in honor of your loved one. Creating art, storytelling, scrapbooking is another important one. Doing albums with the pictures of your loved one. Yet you have to do it at a moment that is right for you, when you're ready to do that. It will come. And another one that is very important is to help other people. There's something healing about helping others, even in the midst of your biggest pain. You regain yourself and you remind yourself of that ability to give and to love. So we also have a set of resources that we'll be emailing to those of you who are interested, a list of books that can help you in this process that you can take at your own leisure and read, lists for online resources, and all sorts of things that you can use to move forward in this process that is part of life. So with that, I leave you with a closing remark and a quote that I love from a story like Winnie the Pooh that says, "If ever there is tomorrow when we're not together, there is something that you must always remember. You are braver than you believe, you are stronger than you seem, and you are smarter than you think. But the most important thing is that even if we are apart, I will always be with you. Because we are always the product of those stories, of those lessons learned that have been left by our loved ones in our life. We are the product of our ancestors, and in that we need to heal, to honor that life that was lived. So thank you for joining us in this webinar. I hope some of the information that we provided to you was helpful. And we will follow up with you to get your feedback. And we look forward to continuing walking in this path that is called life. Thank you.